My name is Mason Carter, 32, and I was just looking for a normal Thanksgiving reunion. 5 years post-transition, I thought enough time had passed for healing. I was wrong. My father Harold's eyes turned to ice when he opened the door. We don't have a daughter. Please leave, he said flatly. Behind him, my brother Ethan smirked, jingling my old room keys on his keychain like trophies. I didn't argue or break down. I simply smiled, pulled out my phone, and called the bank. If you're watching this story unfold, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from, hit that subscribe button, and stick around to see how I turn the tables on the family that tried to erase me. Growing up in suburban Pennsylvania, my childhood looked normal from the outside. Our two-story colonial in Westbrook had the white picket fence, the treehouse my father built when I was 7, and all the trappings of middle-class American life. But beneath that perfect exterior, I struggled with a truth I couldn't articulate until my late teens. I wasn't the daughter my parents thought they had. My earliest memories include a persistent discomfort with dresses my mother Janet would buy, preferring my cousin Jake's hand-me-downs instead. When I was 9, I cut my hair short with kitchen scissors, earning 3 weeks of grounding. My father called it a phase. By 14, I was binding my chest with ace bandages hidden under baggy sweatshirts. The word, transgender, wasn't in my vocabulary yet, but the feeling of disconnection from my assigned gender was a constant companion. My family dynamics were complicated. My older sister Laura, 4 years my senior, caught me binding once when I was 16. Instead of reporting to our parents, she researched, brought me safer options, and became my first ally. My younger brother Ethan, however, was a different story. 2 years younger than me, he always competed for our father's attention, particularly after I started expressing my gender differently. When I would wear button-ups to family events, Ethan would loudly compliment girls in dresses, eyes darting to gauge our father's approval. Everything changed when my mother was diagnosed with aggressive ovarian cancer. I was 21, just finishing college with plans to tell them about my identity. Instead, the next 3 years became a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions, and watching my vibrant mother wither away. During her final months, I think she knew. One afternoon, while my father and siblings were getting lunch, she pressed her grandmother's ring into my palm. "This is for you, when you're ready to be yourself," she whispered. "I've always seen you." She passed 2 weeks later. I never got to hear her call me Mason. After the funeral, my father Harold retreated into himself. A career accountant who managed the local bank branch, he had always been emotionally reserved, but my mother's death transformed that reserve into an impenetrable wall. He spent evenings staring at spreadsheets in his office or silently watching baseball, bourbon in hand. When I finally gathered the courage to come out 6 months after Mom's funeral, telling him I planned to transition, he stared through me as if I hadn't spoken. "Your mother would be heartbroken," was all he said before walking away. I left home a week later, taking only what fit in my sedan. Seattle offered distance, tech opportunities for my computer science degree, and a fresh start. Over 7 years, I'd built a new life, a respected position at a software company, an apartment overlooking Puget Sound, and friends who only knew me as Mason. My transition progressed, with hormones reshaping my body and surgery finally aligning my chest with who I'd always been. The only family connection I maintained was with Laura, who moved to Chicago with her husband Ryan. Every birthday, Christmas, and Thanksgiving brought a hollow ache. I sent cards to my father's address that were never acknowledged. I mailed gifts that were never mentioned in the brief, formal emails Laura would forward from our father. After 5 years of silence, I had almost given up. Then last month, Laura called with unexpected news. "Dad asked about you," she said, voice cautious but hopeful. "He saw your company featured in that tech magazine, the one with you in the team photo." "What did he say?" I asked, heart pounding. "He asked if you were doing well." "I think he's softening, Mason." Maybe it's time to try again. With Laura's encouragement, I requested Thanksgiving week off, booked a flight to Pennsylvania, and prepared myself for either reconciliation or final closure. The familiar landscape of my hometown through the rental car window stirred a mix of nostalgia and anxiety. 7 years is long enough to become a stranger, but not long enough to forget which potholes to avoid on Maple Street or which houses always overdecorated for holidays. I rehearsed what I would say 100 times during the 5-hour flight. I wasn't seeking approval anymore. I was offering my father the chance to know his son. The successful software engineer with 3 patents to his name. The man who volunteers teaching coding to kids on weekends. The son who still remembers how to make his mother's stuffing recipe from scratch. As I parked in front of the house where I grew up, I noticed new shutters, a repainted front door, but the same brass knocker my mother had polished every spring. I grabbed the bottle of bourbon for my father, the homemade cookies for whatever was left of family tradition, and walked up the familiar cracked path to what I hoped would be a new beginning. The November air bit through my jacket as I stood on the porch of my childhood home. The doorbell's chime was new, a melodic tune replacing the harsh buzz I remembered. Yellow light spilled from the frosted glass panels, revealing moving shadows inside. My hands trembled slightly, not from the cold but from the weight of the moment. 7 Thanksgivings had passed since I'd stood in this spot. Through the neighborhood, I could see other families arriving for their celebrations, cars parking, children running up driveways, arms laden with covered dishes and wine bottles. The Richardson family across the street still had their enormous inflatable turkey in the yard. Some things never changed. I shifted the gift bag containing an expensive bottle of Blanton's bourbon, my father's favorite for special occasions, and straightened my tie. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. A charcoal suit that Laura assured me would impress our father, who valued formality at holiday gatherings. The watch he'd given me for high school graduation remained on my wrist, one of the few items of my previous life I'd kept. After one deep breath, I pressed the doorbell. Footsteps approached, heavy, measured. My father's walk. The door swung open, and there he stood. Harold Carter had aged considerably in 7 years. His once salt and pepper hair was now fully silver, combed neatly to the side. New lines mapped his face, particularly around eyes that had once crinkled when he laughed but now narrowed as they registered my presence. For a moment neither of us spoke. I saw the rapid calculations behind his eyes, recognition, confusion, and then a hardening. "Dad," I said, the word feeling both foreign and essential on my tongue. "It's good to see you." His posture stiffened. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of the dining room, table set for 3. A turkey rested on the counter. The scene of a family Thanksgiving that apparently hadn't included plans for me, despite Laura's assurances. "We don't have a daughter," he said, voice flat and cold. "Please leave." The words hit like physical blows, but years of navigating a world that sometimes rejected my existence had built calluses over my heart. I remained steady, even as I noticed movement behind my father. Ethan appeared in the hallway, now 29 and sporting an expensive haircut and designer sweater that seemed at odds with the teaching salary Laura had mentioned he earned. His eyes met mine with unmistakable satisfaction. As he stepped closer, I noticed the keychain dangling from his belt loop, the distinctive brass treble clef that had once hung on my bedroom door key, a 16th birthday gift from my mother. "Problem, Dad?" Ethan asked, placing a protective hand on our father's shoulder while jingling the keys deliberately. I understood then. This hadn't been a miscommunication. Laura's optimism had been manipulated. This was a coordinated rejection, Ethan ensuring I knew he had taken my place, literally claiming my space in the home. Something inside me shifted. The hope for reconciliation dissolved, replaced by a clarity I hadn't anticipated. Without breaking eye contact with my father, I reached for my phone. "I see," I said calmly. "This visit was a mistake, but not mine." I turned and walked to my car, aware of them watching from the doorway. Once inside with the door closed, I allowed myself 10 seconds of compressed grief, eyes shut, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. Then I straightened, selected a contact on my phone, and pressed call. "Benjamin? It's Mason Carter. I need to discuss my mother's estate." Immediately. As I drove away, my rearview mirror framed the house growing smaller, my father still in the doorway, watching with an expression I couldn't read. The last time I'd left this house, I'd been drowning in rejection and uncertainty. This time was different. This time, I understood exactly what had happened in my absence. My mind flashed back to our last real conversation, a week after my mother's funeral. I'd found my father in his study, surrounded by financial documents. "Dad, I need to tell you something important," I'd begun. "Unless it's about the mortgage or your mother's medical bills, it can wait," he'd responded without looking up. "It can't wait anymore. I'm transgender. I'm not your daughter, I'm your son." The silence had stretched between us like an abyss. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, as though addressing a stranger. "Your mother would be heartbroken," he'd said, standing and walking past me as if I'd become invisible. I'd left notes explaining more, books for him to read, my new contact information. All met with silence until today's definitive rejection. As I pulled onto the main road, heading toward the hotel I'd booked as a precaution, my phone rang. Laura's name flashed on the screen. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Whatever had gone wrong with the plan for today, I needed answers first, and I knew exactly where to start looking. The Westbrook Inn hadn't changed since it hosted my senior prom after party 14 years ago. The same faded floral wallpaper lined the lobby, and the elderly clerk Mr. Patterson still manned the front desk, though his once brown mustache had turned white. He didn't recognize me as he handed over the room key, and I didn't volunteer the connection. Room 212 overlooked the town square where the annual Christmas tree would soon be erected. I placed my suitcase on the luggage rack and sat heavily on the bed, finally allowing the day's emotions to surface. The rejection stung, but something else nagged at me, the calculated nature of it all. Ethan's smug display of my old room key. The table set for exactly 3. The immediate, rehearsed rejection. My phone rang again, Laura for the 3rd time. I answered. "Mason! What happened? Dad just called saying you showed up unannounced and left upset." "Unannounced?" I echoed, disbelief coloring my voice. "Laura, we talked about this for weeks. You said Dad was expecting me." A long pause followed. "That's not what Dad's saying. And I'm stuck in Chicago. My flight was canceled due to the snowstorm. I've been trying to reach you all morning." The pieces began falling into place. "When did you tell Dad I was coming?" 2 weeks ago. He seemed not happy exactly, but willing. He didn't object. And Ethan was there for that conversation?" Another pause. "Yes. He actually suggested we all try to reconnect at Thanksgiving." I closed my eyes, understanding washing over me. "Laura, I think we've been played." After explaining what happened, I asked Laura to text me any financial documents she had access to regarding our mother's estate. As the VP of operations for a Chicago consulting firm, Laura had always been organized, keeping digital copies of important family documents. Within minutes, my inbox filled with PDFs, our mother's will, house deed, insurance policies, and bank statements from the years before I left. I spent the next 3 hours creating a digital timeline, using my software development skills to map patterns and inconsistencies. What emerged disturbed me deeply. According to the documents, our mother Janet had established a trust before her death, with assets to be divided equally among her 3 children, with our father as trustee until the youngest, Ethan, turned 25. That had happened 4 years ago, yet no distribution had occurred. The house deed showed an interesting detail. My mother had inherited it from her parents, and maintained it as separate property in her marriage. According to her will, it should have passed equally to all 3 children, with our father retaining lifetime rights to reside there. Most concerning were the bank statements. Large withdrawals began appearing shortly after my departure, always between $5,000 and $9,000, just under the $10,000 threshold that would trigger reporting requirements. The withdrawals continued with increasing frequency, totaling nearly $220,000 over 7 years. At 9 p.m., I called Benjamin Wright, my mother's college friend and attorney who had handled her will. Though retired now, he agreed to meet me for breakfast the following morning. After hanging up, I conducted more research, this time focusing on my brother. Ethan's social media painted a picture at odds with his teacher's salary. Vacations in Bali and Switzerland. A new BMW. Expensive watches. His teaching position at Westbrook High seemed legitimate, but his lifestyle exceeded what it could support. A search of county records revealed more. Ethan had accumulated gambling debts at the Riverview Casino in neighboring Delaware, resulting in 2 liens against him in the past 3 years. More disturbing was a pending civil case by a former girlfriend alleging he had borrowed $45,000 for a family emergency that was never repaid. By midnight, the picture was clear. Ethan had been systematically draining family resources while positioning himself as our father's caretaker and protector. My continued absence served his narrative and financial interests. The final piece came in an email from Laura just before 1 a.m., a photo of a handwritten note in our mother's distinctive script, apparently taken before Laura moved to Chicago. Harold, please ensure Mason receives my mother's ring and the blue chest of family photos when the time is right. I've told him about the ring, but not the additional $50,000 insurance policy with him as sole beneficiary. This is separate from the trust. With love, Janet. I stared at the message, a lump forming in my throat. The ring she had pressed into my hand during her final days, when you're ready to be yourself, had been an intentional gift, not the impulsive gesture I'd believed. And there was more she had intended for me that I'd never received. Sleep eluded me that night. Instead, I prepared documents, organized evidence, and formulated a plan. The hurt of rejection was transforming into something more purposeful. This wasn't just about gaining acceptance anymore. It was about justice, for my mother's wishes, for my father's manipulation, and for the truth that had been buried under years of Ethan's deception. As dawn broke over Westbrook, I showered and dressed carefully in a blue suit my mother would have approved of. The confrontation ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since arriving, I felt certain of my path forward. I wasn't fighting for a place at the Thanksgiving table anymore. I was fighting for the truth. Benjamin Wright still ordered the same breakfast after all these years: 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee. At 72, his hands showed age spots, but his legal mind remained razor-sharp. We sat in a corner booth at Maggie's Diner, where the morning crowd of retirees and early shift workers provided perfect cover for our conversation. Janet would be furious, Benjamin said after reviewing my findings. His fork punctuated the air as he spoke. She was meticulous about her estate planning precisely because she worried about something like this. Did my father have legal authority to withhold trust distributions? I asked. Benjamin adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. As trustee, Harold has some discretion, but not to this extent. The trust language is clear: equal distribution once Ethan turned 25. And the house arrangement specifically names all 3 children as remainder beneficiaries. He pulled out additional documents from his weathered leather briefcase, copies he'd kept of everything he'd prepared for my mother. There's something else you should know, he continued, voice lowering. About 3 years after you left, your father came to me about changing the trust terms. I refused, explaining he didn't have that authority. He claimed you had abandoned the family and rejected your mother's memory by choosing your lifestyle. My coffee turned bitter in my mouth. Those sound like Ethan's words. Precisely my thought. Benjamin nodded. A month later, Harold tried again with a different attorney. Fortunately, the new lawyer contacted me for the original documents, and I explained the situation. But it shows intent. What are my options? Benjamin outlined several paths forward, from full legal action to negotiated resolution. The evidence of financial impropriety was substantial, potentially enough for criminal charges against Ethan and removal of my father as trustee. But that nuclear option would destroy what remained of our family. Before we go further, Benjamin said, I should tell you something about your brother's influence. After you left, Ethan became the primary narrator of your story in Westbrook. He told people you'd had a mental breakdown, rejected the family, even claimed you'd stolen money before leaving. I winced, though I wasn't entirely surprised. And my father allowed this? Harold was compromised by grief. He retreated from church, from friends. Ethan stepped into that void, becoming his interpreter to the world. By the time people realized what was happening, the narrative was established. Armed with legal clarity, I left Benjamin to make preparations for our next steps. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Laura, who had rebooked her flight and would arrive that evening. I texted her to meet me at the hotel rather than going directly to the house. My next stop was unexpected, the home of Tyler Rodriguez, my best friend from high school until we'd lost touch after graduation. Finding his address through a quick social media search, I took a chance on reconnecting. His shocked expression when he opened the door quickly transformed into a bear hug that nearly crushed my ribs. "Mason Carter, you son of a gun!" He laughed, pulling me inside his modest rancher. "Laura told me you might be coming home, but I figured you'd be busy with family." Over the next hour, Tyler filled crucial gaps in my understanding. As a physical therapist who had treated my father following a minor stroke 3 years ago, Tyler had unique insights into the household dynamics. "Your dad got better physically, but Ethan had already established control by then," Tyler explained. "He screens visitors, manages medications, handles all the finances. Your father's bank statements, bills, everything goes through Ethan first." "And nobody questioned this?" Tyler shrugged. "Ethan presents it as devoted son caring for widowed father. Plus, he told everyone you wanted nothing to do with the family. Said you refused to even call when your dad had his stroke." "I never knew about any stroke," I said quietly. "Laura didn't tell me." Because Laura wasn't told either, not until weeks afterward. Ethan controlled that information too. The picture grew clearer and more disturbing. Tyler offered his full support, including testimony about Ethan's management of my father's affairs if needed. Before leaving, I asked about one more person, Ms. Abernathy, my mother's best friend and our former neighbor. "Still in the same house," Tyler confirmed. "Still brings your dad casseroles every Sunday. If anyone can reach him emotionally, it's her." By afternoon, I had visited Ms. Abernathy, who wept upon seeing me and immediately offered her support. She confirmed what Benjamin and Tyler had suggested. Ethan had methodically isolated our father while positioning himself as the loyal, suffering son dealing with a father in decline and a sibling who had abandoned them. Back at the hotel, I organized all gathered evidence into 3 categories: legal documents showing my rights to family property, financial records demonstrating Ethan's misappropriation, and testimonials about his manipulation of our father. When Laura arrived at 7 p.m., exhausted from travel delays but determined to help, we finalized our approach for Thanksgiving Day. "We could just confront them tonight," Laura suggested. I shook my head. "Tomorrow is better. It's Thanksgiving, neutral ground, symbolically important. And it gives Benjamin time to prepare the legal notices if needed. Are you sure you want to go through with this? We could just walk away, Mason. You've built a good life in Seattle." I showed her our mother's note about the ring and photos. "This isn't just about money or property, Laura. It's about Mom's wishes being honored. It's about the truth." That night, I called Ryan Schaefer, my closest friend in Seattle, for a final gut check on my plan. As both a friend and corporate attorney, his perspective was valuable. "The evidence is solid," Ryan said after I'd outlined everything. "But are you prepared for your father to choose Ethan despite the truth? People can be presented with irrefutable facts and still choose comforting lies." His question haunted me as I laid out my suit for the following day. The confrontation ahead wasn't just about reclaiming material things, but something far more valuable: the truth of who I was and what had really happened to our family. My mother had seen me. Tomorrow would reveal whether my father was capable of the same clarity, or if Ethan's poisonous narrative had permanently blinded him. Thanksgiving Day dawned bright and cold, sunlight glinting off frost-covered lawns throughout Westbrook. The weather matched my state of mind, clear, sharp, bracing. Laura and I reviewed our strategy over breakfast, her corporate negotiation skills complementing my methodical approach to problem-solving. Benjamin would arrive separately with the legal documentation, providing an official weight to our claims. "Remember," Laura cautioned as we prepared to leave, "this is about truth, not revenge." I nodded, though the distinction felt increasingly blurred. The hurt child in me wanted vindication, while the adult I'd become sought resolution. Both would have their moment today. We arrived at the family home at precisely 1 p.m., when Thanksgiving dinner was traditionally served in the Carter household. I parked behind Benjamin's Volvo, noting Ethan's BMW occupied the prime spot in the driveway. Laura squeezed my hand before we approached the front door. Benjamin greeted us on the porch, leather portfolio tucked under his arm. "Your father tried to turn me away," he said quietly. "I mentioned potential legal consequences of continued obstruction regarding Janet's estate. He reluctantly allowed me in but seems confused about why I'm here." I rang the doorbell, steeling myself for another rejection. The door swung open to reveal my father, looking smaller somehow in a sweater that hung loosely on his frame. His expression shifted rapidly from annoyance to shock when he registered both Laura and me on his doorstep. "Laura? You said your flight was delayed until tomorrow," he said, confusion evident. "I got an earlier connection," she replied smoothly. "Happy Thanksgiving, Dad. May we come in?" Before he could answer, Ethan appeared behind him. "What's happening? Why is Benjamin here?" His eyes narrowed upon seeing me. "And why is she back?" I corrected firmly. "And I'm here because it's Thanksgiving, and this is still legally my family home too." I stepped forward, not waiting for permission to enter. 7 years of absence had not erased my knowledge of this space, the slight unevenness in the foyer floorboards, the family photos lining the hallway wall, though I noticed with a pang that pictures including me had been removed. The dining room table was set for 3, turkey and sides already arranged. The good china that my mother had reserved for holidays gleamed under the chandelier light. I moved to the dining room and placed the folder of documents I'd brought on the sideboard. "What do you think you're doing?" Ethan demanded, color rising in his face. "Having Thanksgiving dinner with my family," I replied evenly. "And clearing up some misunderstandings about our mother's estate." My father remained in the doorway, looking bewildered as Benjamin guided him to a seat at the head of the table. Laura efficiently added 2 place settings from the china cabinet, her movements purposeful and calm despite the tension crackling through the room. "Dad doesn't need this stress," Ethan protested, placing a hand on our father's shoulder. "The doctor said to avoid upsetting situations." "Interesting you should mention doctors," I said, pulling out a chair. "I spoke with Dr. Levine yesterday. He had no recollection of giving such advice and was quite surprised to hear you've been representing yourself as Dad's medical proxy." Ethan's face paled slightly. Our father looked up, confusion deepening the lines around his eyes. "What is this about?" he finally asked, voice raspy with emotion or perhaps disuse. I nodded to Benjamin, who opened his portfolio and placed several documents on the table. "Harold," Benjamin began formally, "as Janet's executor and longtime family attorney, I'm here to address some irregularities in the administration of her estate." He slid the trust document forward. Specifically, the trust Janet established was to be distributed equally among your 3 children when Ethan turned 25. That was 4 years ago. My father frowned, looking genuinely perplexed. The trust was distributed. Ethan handled the paperwork when he took over the finances after my stroke. Laura and I exchanged glances. "Dad," she said gently, "Mason and I never received any distribution." "That's ridiculous," Ethan interjected. "I sent the checks. If Mason didn't receive hers, it's because she moved without telling anyone and left no forwarding address." "His," I corrected again. "And I've maintained the same address in Seattle for 5 years. Laura has always had my contact information, as did the family attorney." I turned to Benjamin. Did you facilitate any trust distribution? No, Benjamin confirmed. No distributions have been made from the trust. I would have been required to sign off on them. My father turned to Ethan, uncertainty clouding his expression. You said the paperwork was complicated because of the situation with your sister. You said it was handled. I'm your son, Dad, I said quietly but firmly. I've always been your son, even before I had the language for it. And nothing was handled. Ethan has been lying to you. Ethan's composure began to crack. This is absurd. You abandoned us when Mom died. You rejected everything she valued to chase some delusion. I cut him off by placing our mother's handwritten note on the table. Mom knew who I was, Ethan. She accepted me before she died. I turned to my father. She left specific instructions about her ring and family photos for me. Did you know about those? My father's hand trembled as he reached for the note, recognizing Janet's handwriting immediately. Where did you get this? I took a photo before moving to Chicago, Laura explained. I found it in Mom's jewelry box when I was helping pack her things. There's more, I continued, methodically laying out bank statements showing the systematic withdrawals from family accounts. Over $200,000 has disappeared from what should have been our shared inheritance. Meanwhile, Ethan has taken vacations to Bali and Switzerland, bought a BMW, and accumulated gambling debts at Riverview Casino. Ethan's face contorted with rage. You have no right to investigate me. You gave up any right to this family when you decided to mutilate yourself and reject everything Mom and Dad raised us to be. The room fell silent at his outburst. Even Ethan seemed shocked by the venom in his voice. My father stared at him with dawning comprehension. Is it true? He asked Ethan quietly. The money? Ethan's defensive posture faltered. I was going to pay it back. The investments just haven't matured yet. And everything I did was to protect you after she left you to deal with Mom's death alone. My father corrected, so softly I almost missed it. His eyes met mine briefly before returning to Ethan. Your brother didn't leave us alone. I pushed him away. The admission hung in the air, fragile and unexpected. I felt Laura's hand find mine under the table, squeezing in silent support. Benjamin cleared his throat. Harold, there are serious legal implications here. Misappropriation of trust assets, potential elder financial abuse, fraudulent representation. What do you want? My father interrupted, addressing me directly for the first time. Why are you really here? The question struck at the heart of everything. What did I want? Revenge? Acceptance? Justice? The answer crystallized with sudden clarity. I want the truth acknowledged, I said simply. I want Mom's wishes respected. And I want my father back, if he's willing to see me for who I actually am. Ethan scoffed. Always about you, isn't it? Dad's health declined after you left. I've been here every day, managing everything while you played pretend on the other side of the country. That's enough, Ethan, my father said, his voice stronger now. He turned to Benjamin. What happens if I acknowledge the irregularities in the trust management? We can arrange proper distribution without involving authorities, Benjamin explained. But full financial accounting will be necessary, and Ethan would need to return misappropriated funds. Ethan slammed his hand on the table, causing the china to rattle. This is insane. You're taking her side over mine after everything I've done? His side. My father corrected again, more firmly this time. And I'm not taking sides. I'm facing facts I've been avoiding for too long. He turned to me, really looking at me perhaps for the first time. You look like your grandfather. My father. I didn't let myself see it before. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I maintained composure. This fragile moment of recognition felt too precious to disrupt with emotion. Ethan wasn't finished. His desperate glance darted between us before landing on a final gambit. Dad, the doctor said stress could trigger another stroke. You don't need this right now. Actually, I interjected. Dr. Levine said moderate emotional engagement is beneficial for cognitive health following minor strokes. Isolation is more dangerous. My father's eyes widened slightly. You spoke to my doctor? With his permission, I clarified. Medical privacy laws allowed him to listen to my concerns without confirming your status as a patient. But once I provided evidence I'm your son and that there might be medical proxy misrepresentation, he agreed to a general conversation about stroke recovery. Ethan's facade finally collapsed completely. Fine. I took some money. You have no idea what it's been like here, stuck in this house with him dwelling on the past, buried in grief, while you got to start fresh. Everything I did was because you left us with the mess. Ethan, my father said, his voice carrying a warning tone I remembered from childhood. Stop. In that single word, I heard the father I remembered, the one who had taught me to change oil in the car, who had built me a treehouse when I was 7, before gender expectations had complicated our relationship. Something fundamental had shifted in the room's dynamic. Ethan must have sensed it too. He grabbed his keys from the counter, including my old room key still on the treble clef keychain. This is bullshit. I'm not sitting here while you let her destroy what's left of our family. Him. My father corrected for the third time, the word now coming naturally. And the only one destroying this family is you, with lies and theft. Ethan stormed out, the front door slamming with enough force to rattle the family photos in the hallway. In the silence that followed, Laura quietly began serving the cooling Thanksgiving meal, her practical nature asserting itself in the face of emotional chaos. My father looked older than his 65 years as he stared at the empty doorway, but when he turned back to me, I saw something I hadn't expected: relief. I have a lot to understand, he said carefully, and more to make up for. But I'd like to try. Mason. My name on his lips, spoken with intention rather than obligation, was the first real gift I'd received from him in 7 years. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and reached for the mashed potatoes Laura offered. The Thanksgiving meal began in awkward silence, but as Benjamin tactfully guided conversation toward neutral memories of my mother, the atmosphere gradually thawed. Nothing was resolved completely, but truth had finally claimed its place at our family table. The days following Thanksgiving unfolded in a careful dance of legal procedures and emotional reckonings. Benjamin acted swiftly to secure the family assets, freezing accounts Ethan had access to and filing the necessary paperwork to formalize the trust distribution my mother had intended. Ethan vanished briefly, his apartment emptied overnight, but resurfaced 3 days later with an attorney of his own, a development that suggested at least some acknowledgement of the seriousness of his situation. My father and I established an uneasy truce, navigating the unfamiliar territory of his medical appointments, which I now attended with him, and quiet evenings in the living room where grief and regret hung between us like an additional presence. He struggled with pronouns occasionally but corrected himself without prompting, each effort a small bridge across the chasm 7 years had created. I kept track of you, he admitted one evening, 5 days after Thanksgiving. We sat in his study, the room largely unchanged since my youth except for the proliferation of medication bottles on his desk. After the article in the technology magazine showed your team photo, he crossed to the bookshelf and removed several volumes, revealing a hidden folder behind them. Inside were printouts of my company's press releases, a printed LinkedIn profile, even a Seattle newspaper clipping mentioning the coding program I'd developed for local schools. I didn't know how to reach out, he continued, not meeting my eyes. Pride, I suppose? And fear that you'd reject me as I rejected you. I sent cards every year, I reminded him, keeping my voice gentle despite the ache his words produced. My contact information never changed. He nodded, shoulders slumping. Ethan said you sent them to mock us. That they were cruel reminders of your choice to abandon the family. I believed him because it was easier than facing my own failure. The legal discussions with Ethan eventually produced a settlement rather than criminal charges. He agreed to repay the misappropriated funds over 5 years, with his teacher's pension as collateral. Benjamin had argued for stricter consequences, but I opted for mercy, not for Ethan's sake, but for my father's. "He's still your son," I told my father when we discussed the decision. "And despite everything, he's still my brother." My father seemed relieved at this approach, though he maintained appropriate boundaries with Ethan, insisting on financial oversight and regular accountability. Whether our brother could rebuild any trust remained an open question none of us could answer yet. Laura extended her stay by a week, helping organize the distribution of our mother's personal effects that had been delayed for years. In the attic, we discovered the blue chest my mother's note had mentioned, filled with family photographs, including many of me as a child. Unlike the curated selection that had lined the hallway downstairs, these showed me in moments of authentic joy, building model rockets with my father, fishing at my grandfather's pond, reading under the maple tree in our backyard. "She kept the real you," Laura observed, handing me a photo of 12-year-old me with short hair after a summer camp where I'd convinced the counselor to cut it. In the picture, I was beaming despite knowing I'd face consequences at home. "Mom saw you even then." The most difficult moment came when my father formally returned my mother's ring, the one she had pressed into my palm during her final days. He placed it in a new box, the gesture deliberate and ceremonial. "She told me she was giving this to you," he admitted. "I was angry at her for it, for what I saw as encouraging, what I didn't understand then." His eyes met mine, clear and present in a way they hadn't been since before my mother's illness. "I'm sorry, Mason. For not honoring her wishes. For not seeing you." I slipped the ring onto my pinky finger, where it fit perfectly. "Thank you for returning it." "It wasn't mine to keep," he replied simply. On the 7th day after Thanksgiving, I reclaimed my old bedroom. Ethan had indeed taken it over after my departure, but my father insisted on returning it to me, if only symbolically, since my life remained in Seattle. Together we removed Ethan's belongings, storing them in the basement until he arranged to collect them. The room felt smaller than I remembered, the blue walls faded in rectangular patches where posters had once hung. My father had preserved my old desk, the surface still bearing the ink stain from an exploded pen during high school finals week. He watched from the doorway as I ran my fingers over the familiar imperfection. "I couldn't bring myself to refinish it," he explained, even when Ethan wanted to. That night, sleeping in my childhood bed for the first time in 7 years, I found unexpected peace. The house creaked in its familiar patterns, the heating system's gentle rumble, the subtle settling of wooden beams. Outside my window, the same streetlight cast amber patterns across my ceiling. So much had changed, yet these constants remained, anchoring me to a past that, while painful, had shaped the man I'd become. In the morning, Laura departed for Chicago with promises to return for Christmas. My flight back to Seattle was scheduled for the following day. Over breakfast, my father and I discussed practical matters, his health care, the house maintenance, the frequency of our future calls. "Will you come back?" he asked as we cleared the dishes together, his hands less steady than I remembered but still methodical in their movements. "For Christmas," I confirmed. "And maybe for longer next summer. I can work remotely for a few weeks." He nodded, seemingly satisfied. "The guest room needs updating if you'll be staying longer. The mattress is from when your mother's parents would visit. I'll help with that when I return," I promise, recognizing the comment for what it was, not just practical planning but an acknowledgement of future relationship, of continued presence in each other's lives. That afternoon, we visited my mother's grave together. I hadn't been since the funeral, and seeing her name etched in granite made her absence newly raw. My father placed white roses, her favorite, while I added a small stone as was her family's tradition. We stood in silence, the December wind cutting through our jackets. "She would be proud of you," my father said finally. "Not despite who you are, but because of it. Your strength, your compassion even after how we treated you. That's what she valued most." His words, perhaps the most healing he had offered, carried us back to the house where we spent our final evening reviewing old family albums. With each photograph, a piece of my excised history was restored, my presence in the family narrative reclaimed. When I departed the next morning, the goodbye was neither easy nor complete. It was, like everything in our new relationship, a work in progress, tentative but genuine. My father hugged me awkwardly at first, then more firmly, his hand patting my back in the masculine gesture he had always used with my male cousins. "Safe travels, son," he said, the word no longer forced or political but simple truth. I drove away with the rearview mirror capturing his figure growing smaller on the porch, hand raised in farewell. The road ahead led back to Seattle, to my apartment overlooking Puget Sound, to colleagues who had only known me as Mason. But now that road no longer led away from family. It simply connected two parts of a life that no longer required division. 2 months after the Thanksgiving confrontation, I returned to Pennsylvania for Christmas. The transformation in my relationship with my father, while still evolving, continued to strengthen through our twice-weekly video calls. Laura had already arrived with her husband Ryan when my flight landed, the three of them waiting at baggage claim with a hand-lettered sign reading, "Welcome home, Mason." The house itself had changed too. Holiday decorations adorned the living room, including the angel tree topper my mother had cherished. My childhood stocking hung alongside Laura's and my father's, my name newly embroidered to replace the former one. These tangible acknowledgments of my identity spoke volumes about my father's ongoing efforts. "I found someone to do the embroidery," he explained somewhat shyly when he caught me examining the stocking. "Mrs. Abernathy recommended her. I hope it's appropriate." The careful way he sought confirmation without presuming to know what would feel affirming touched me deeply. "It's perfect, Dad." "Thank you." Throughout the holiday week, my father continued making conscientious efforts with pronouns and my name, rarely slipping and immediately correcting himself when he did. During Christmas dinner with extended family, my first time seeing many relatives since transition, he set the tone immediately. "My son Mason has achieved remarkable success in Seattle," he announced during the toast, his voice carrying an unmistakable note of pride. The statement established both recognition and expectation for how others should address me, a protective gesture I hadn't anticipated from him. News of Ethan arrived indirectly. He had enrolled in a gambling addiction program in Philadelphia and was staying with a cousin while completing the first phase of treatment. He declined the invitation to join Christmas celebrations but sent cards to both my father and Laura. Mine arrived at my Seattle address after my departure, a store-bought message with a brief handwritten note. "Working on myself. Maybe someday we can talk." The gesture, while minimal, suggested possibilities I hadn't considered during the height of our confrontation. Recovery would be his choice, just as reclaiming my identity had been mine. Time would reveal whether he could make the difficult journey toward authenticity and accountability. By February, legal matters had been largely resolved. The trust distribution provided each of us with our rightful inheritance, though Ethan's portion remained in escrow until he completed restitution for the misappropriated funds. My father transferred partial ownership of the family home to Laura and me as my mother had intended, while maintaining his lifetime right to reside there. More meaningful than these material resolutions was my decision to divide my time between Seattle and Pennsylvania. My company readily approved a flexible arrangement allowing me to work remotely for 2 weeks every quarter. I purchased a small cabin 20 minutes from my father's house, close enough for regular visits, but maintaining the independence I had worked hard to establish. During my April visit, my father and I embarked on our first shared project, renovating the cabin's dated kitchen. His carpentry skills remained sharp despite his health challenges, and working side by side created space for conversations that might have been awkward in more formal settings. "I looked up information about transgender people," he told me as we installed new cabinet hardware, his focus on the screwdriver allowing him to avoid direct eye contact during the vulnerable admission. "Books, websites. I wanted to understand better." "That means a lot, Dad." "I should have done it years ago," he replied, his voice thick with regret. "When you first told me." "We can't change that," I said gently. "But now it matters." The spring and summer brought continued healing. Laura gave birth to her first child in May, a daughter named Janet after our mother. During my June visit, I witnessed my father fully embrace his role as grandfather, his joy in this new chapter providing common ground for all of us. With a new generation, family traditions could be re-examined and reshaped to include authentic recognition of each member. My mother's influence remained a powerful presence in our healing process. The ring she had given me never left my finger, a tangible reminder of her early acceptance. During a thunderstorm in July that knocked out power to my father's neighborhood, we sat by candlelight sharing memories of her. "She knew, you know," my father said softly. "Even before you told us. She mentioned once that you were struggling with something important, and we should be prepared to love you through whatever changes might come." "She never told me that," I replied, surprised. "She wanted you to share in your own time." I didn't understand then what she meant. He stared into his glass of bourbon. "After she died, and you told me. I could only see it as another loss. I couldn't see that you were still right there." By Thanksgiving 2025, 1 year after the confrontation that had changed everything, our family gathered again around the dining table. Ethan joined us, his presence tentative but significant. 9 months of therapy and recovery had softened the defensive anger that had driven his behavior for years. While full trust remained a distant goal, his sincere efforts to make amends created space for cautious rebuilding. The most profound moment came unexpectedly as we prepared to serve dessert. My father, returning from the kitchen with my mother's cherished pie server, paused beside my chair. "Mason," he said clearly, "would you do the honors? Your mother would want her son to continue the tradition." The room fell silent, the casual use of my name and male identity in the context of family tradition striking a deep chord. I accepted the server with steady hands, though my heart raced with the significance of the moment. This wasn't mere tolerance or political correctness. It was full recognition of my place in our family's ongoing story. Later that evening, as our guests departed and the house quieted, I sat on the back porch swing where I had often retreated as a teenager. My father joined me, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders against the November chill. "I want you to know," he said after we had swung in companionable silence for several minutes, "that I'm proud of the man you've become. Not because you've succeeded professionally, though you have, but because of your character. Your mother would see that too." The words I had longed to hear for so many years washed over me, healing places I hadn't realized were still wounded. My journey to selfhood had never been about rejection of family, but about being authentic enough to truly belong within it. The path had been longer and more painful than it should have been, but sitting beside my father under the same stars that had witnessed my childhood struggles, I felt the circuit of belonging finally complete. Family, I've learned, is both inheritance and creation. The one we're born into shapes us, but the one we build through courage and authenticity sustains us. Sometimes they can become the same thing, when truth is finally given its proper place at the table. Have you ever had to stand firm in your truth despite rejection from those who should love you most? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. The journey toward authentic self isn't easy, but it's one worth taking, and sometimes, those who initially reject us find their way back when we refuse to abandon ourselves. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more, give it a thumbs up, and share it with someone who might need to know they're not alone. Thank you for witnessing my journey, and remember, your worth isn't determined by others' ability to see it.